Alrighty, so there are 4 alumni today. We have Chloe Holmes from the class of 2018. She majored in international business and French. And Chloe is currently working for the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. She just completed her master's at American University. So Chloe, if you could just say hi so we can all see who you are.
Hi, hopefully you all can hear me. I'm in the car right now, so if there are any audio issues, I apologize. Please let me know.
I can hear you all right. It seems that everybody else can hear you all right. Thank you so much for joining us. Sarah Kennedy is also from the class of 2018. She majored in international studies and French and got a minor in English. She's currently in Berlin, Germany, and she still decided to join us, so thank you. She's currently in her 2nd year of a master's in public policy at Hertie School, and you can correct me if you're wrong, if I'm pronouncing that wrong. But if you could say hello.
Yes, hi guys. Technically the German pronunciation is the Hertie School, but no one cares, it's the Hertie School.
Thank you. We have Meaghan Teitelman, also correct me if I'm wrong. She majored in sociology and anthropology, as well as French, and she got a minor in Spanish. She currently teaches and coaches at Laurel School. She teaches middle school French and coaches varsity field hockey, and she is in Cleveland Heights, Ohio. So if you could say hello, Meaghan.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you.
So glad to have you. And then last but absolutely not least, we have Alex Sanchez. Do you prefer Alex or Alexander?
If we're going by first name, Alexander.
Perfect. So Alexander, he graduated last year actually, so I got the chance to meet him. He majored in international studies and French and minored in women's and gender studies, as well as politics and government. And this Tuesday, Alex is actually going to start his master's program at the University of Chicago, focusing in international relations. So I'm so excited for you and best of luck. If you could also,
Thank you.
Yes. So glad to have you. Are there any technical questions, any logistical questions that any of you have before I start the discussion? Alrighty. Okay. So I'm just going to call on each of the, actually, you guys can answer. I will call on the speakers one by one to answer the questions. So first question, how was your experience while studying abroad related to your major? Were there certain challenges you faced if you're a science major or if you majored in something clearly other than a language? And then were there certain advantages from studying abroad? Sarah, if you could get us started.
Yeah, sure. I think we all studied international studies or language, so I'm not sure we're going to be able to speak to the science majors here. But yeah, for me, it was required with the French major. It was also required, I think, with the international studies major, and it was something that I wanted to do. That's part of the reason why I chose OU, was because I wanted to study abroad. Yeah, pass to someone else.
Yeah, Meaghan?
Awesome. Yeah, so I was a French major, like you said, and so I went to France for a summer. I wasn't a science major, but I was a student athlete, and I know Chloe experienced this as well. So I think there were some challenges in trying to figure out how to get a season in and how to study abroad. I ended up going over the summer to accommodate that. I kind of wish I'd just gone for a semester, but that's the decision I made at the time. So there are definitely ways to work it in if you want to be at OU for the full year.
All right, thank you. Alexander?
Kind of on the same boat as Meaghan. I actually also we did the same program just in different years, over different summers. I think that one piece of advice that I would always give to beginning French students was that it just takes a lot of planning. I feel like we've had alumni that have majored in some form of natural science and was still able to do a study abroad program. And, just to reiterate, it is possible. It is very much possible. It just does take quite a bit of planning. And that's always something that an academic advisor can help out with as well. That's part of what their responsibilities as an advisor is, to get you all the help you need to do the things that you want, but also be able to graduate in a timely manner in a way that, doesn't overwork you in the long run. So that's my piece of advice that I always give.
Thank you so much. Chloe?
Yeah, like Meg said, I was also an athlete, so that was one of my key factors in figuring out a time to study abroad. But it was required for both my French major and my international business major, so I knew I had to go at some point. But my international business major had so many units that were required, and I didn't start that freshman year. So I think the summer ended up being the perfect time so that I could fit in all my courses at OU during the school year, because my program abroad in Switzerland was more international studies focused. So a lot of those didn't come back to my business major. It was all to my French major.
And if I can just jump back in real quick.
Absolutely.
I studied abroad for a year, and partially what I credit the ability to do that to is that my freshman year or like first semester sophomore year, I took the credits that were required classes instead of taking the gen ed requirements. And that meant that during my study abroad semester, I could take gen ed requirements and not be missing that semester that was required by the major.
Yeah, I will say, like, Sarah knocked this out of the park. She did this, I think, the right way. And I'm looking back thinking, like, trying to figure out how to get back to France now. But Sarah, absolutely, like, you had a full year, and that's the ideal. So if you can plan it that way, 100%, as an alum who didn't do that, do that.
Though I will say, in my personal experience, the reason why I decided to go for the summer abroad instead of the semester, while it was more expensive to do so, I think that it was definitely, I wasn't in a position where I wanted to fully get out of my comfort zone at the time and go for the full 6 months. So at the time that I decided to study abroad, the shorter summer term was what was more convenient for me, even though it was a lot more expensive. So I think that there's a lot of ways that one could go about it in a way that, completes your requirements, but also fits with what your comfort level in whatever circumstance of life you're in, how that fits into what you're trying to plan out.
That's really helpful. Thank you. All right. Did you stay with a host family, in campus housing, or in an apartment? And how did these living arrangements impact your experience? We can start with Alexander.
Sure. So I personally stayed with a host family. This was what Meaghan and kind of had recommended, and it was absolutely the best. Well, that's what she recommended to me when I was considering doing the program, to be more specific. And it was absolutely one of the best decisions I could have made. While yes, it would have been good to have the experience of living on my own, I think that in terms of strengthening my French speaking abilities, which was what I was primarily studying abroad to do, it was definitely the most helpful, because sometimes you'll be with a family who speaks very little English, and that kind of forces you in a position where you have to practice your French as opposed to, helping them with their English, for example. So while it is a very jarring situation at first, it helps out in the long run, because I definitely feel like in the 6 weeks that I was in Avignon in southern France, my French skills improved significantly because of the fact that I was having to speak to this family in French the whole time.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think my French skills grew over the dinner table. So that was huge for me, especially because it was, as Alexander said, a short program. I wanted to cram it in, and I knew that living with a family would be the way to do it. I know that, you know, people have had a lot of success, especially in longer programs, living in apartments or student housing. But time was of the essence. And I know that my friends who lived in apartments for that program, they didn't really speak French outside of class. And I was really lucky because I lived with actually all of our very close friends from OWU. So we were like navigating that host family experience together, which was amazing. But even if you don't have a buddy like we did, it's really fun. And that's what you're going to remember a lot of the time from your experience abroad.
So this is less about my experience, but I was actually talking to a friend a couple hours ago about how she really wishes that she had a host family to go visit. Having now been out of university for a while, and I personally have host families all over Europe that I can go back and visit. And the one I had in France, we don't stay in contact, but there's nothing bad about her. We just don't stay in contact. The family I had in Brussels, I've now gone back to visit twice. And so if you study abroad and you stay in a student apartment, you don't have that family to potentially go back to in the future, which I think is maybe a reason to stick out some of the tougher or more complicated aspects, just so that you have a connection in the country later on in case you want it.
Chloe, what about you?
Yeah, I stayed with a host family. We didn't have a choice, actually. I think that was our only option, was to stay with host families. Personally, I got pretty lucky. My host family had 3 kids. They were, I think, 13 and under. So I think I learned a lot more like informal words and vocabulary and stuff through that. And I got to do fun activities like go to their music festivals and like choir concerts and things, and like attend their like end of school art shows and whatnot. So I got a little bit more like informal practice, and it was, while they still spoke extremely fast and they all knew like 6 languages, you know, they would speak kind of, the kids I could understand, I guess, a bit more, but they also knew fluent English. My host mom, host dad, and the oldest child. So they spoke a lot of English with me, which I think was a bit of a downside, because they kind of wanted their kids, the 2 other kids, to learn a bit more English. So we definitely spoke probably more English than was intended during that 6 weeks, but I think it was still good to have kids there to interact with on like a different basis.
Got it. Yeah, I studied abroad in high school. I was a foreign exchange student, and I stayed with host families and found it extremely beneficial. Okay, so while studying abroad, with whom did you engage? Other Americans, foreigners, natives, and how might that have affected your experience while abroad? Meaghan, you want to start this one?
Sure, yeah. So Alexander and I, like we said, we did the same program. It's a lot of American students, which was exciting in the fact that like I still have a lot of friends in the US from that program, but I think it was lacking in, like, I didn't have that French, experience with French friends as much as I was hoping to, which is why the host family was so big for me. But we did end up becoming close friends with our American friend's host sister, and we still are in touch all the time. Very much though, if you are looking for a program where you're going to be surrounded by speakers of that language, do your research, because there are ways that you can do it where you can, if you're more comfortable going to that country surrounded by American students, there are programs for that. If you're more interested in like going solo and having to really use your language all the time, then make sure you find a program that's going to support that as well. Because that, we technically did an immersion program, Alexander, but there was a lot of English happening away from the people in charge. And we tried our best, but it can be challenging too when everyone's at a different level of the language. So that was my experience. I don't know, maybe Alexander's was different.
It was pretty similar on my end. I sometimes would try talking in French with students here and there. But then I also had the situation where when I was by myself, and there were times where I'm not the kind of person who likes to be alone, but sometimes I like to go on walks by myself, right? That's the situation where I'm okay, like going on a walk in broad daylight, be by myself, that's okay. But then I encountered the situation where I would talk to people in French, and then sometimes they would start talking back in English to me, because they could clock the fact that, oh, this person doesn't speak French natively. I'm gonna try to help this poor person out. But interestingly enough, sometimes it was because they knew that I was American, which that's already another story. But then sometimes it was because they thought I was from Canada. Like I definitely got the situation where they thought, "Oh, are you from Quebec?" And I'm like, "No, not even close." Um, so there was definitely the attempts at interacting with like people outside of the program, but even then, sometimes it would just work out in a way that you don't intend because the person is like, um, because they notice that you're not a native speaker, and so they're trying to help you out there, and it's like, no, no, you'd help me out more if you're talking in French.
Yeah, okay. So my program in France, in Paris, was one of these, like, it was IES, which caters to American college students. The difference, I think, is I somehow ended up being in this group of people who really wanted to, like, were dedicated to French. And I didn't speak English for the first, like, 3 or 4 weeks. I wasn't talking to French people. It was Americans, and most of them had been studying French since elementary school, so they had a level that was a lot higher than mine. But because maybe it was luck or chance, I don't know how I found these people, but I learned a lot of French just through that. And it was fun because even if we messed up, we knew what each other were trying to say because we all speak English and we all make the same mistakes. That helped a lot. And then in Brussels, I was one of 4 Americans. The program only had 4 people. We were all Americans, but I was working in an office that were all Maltese people. And then I met these Germans and I spent a lot of time with the German cohort, and I had Italian friends. And I mean, Brussels is a very international city. There were like after work parties for my office and for all of the interns. And there were hundreds of interns from all over the world. So that was a really cool experience.
That sounds so interesting. Well, did you complete an internship while studying abroad?
Yeah, so I actually was Googling because I wanted to have 2 semesters abroad. I wanted one focused on French and one focused on international relations. So for the second one, I desperately wanted an internship. None of OU's programs really offered an internship that wasn't in like a you pay to work kind of situation. And so I was Googling around and found this program that happened to be run by a university in my hometown. I sent in like the OU petition and dealt with bureaucracy. And then essentially you interned for 20, 25 hours a week in Brussels and then took 2 classes at a neighboring English-speaking university. Yeah, and there were only 4 or 5 kids in the program, but at the other university, I had met people from other study abroad programs who were all at this English-speaking university, and then there were actual people who studied there for the full 4 years as well. Yeah, it was a very different type of program, but I'm so glad I stumbled upon it.
That's awesome. Chloe, if we could hear from you to answer the question, and if you need me to repeat the question, I can totally do that.
I think I remember it, but if I'm off base, let me know. So my program consisted of a lot of people of various French levels. Some of them had never spoken French really before. They had taken maybe a course or 2. So it kind of catered to everybody. So in that regard, when we were all together, we didn't really speak French like at all outside of the classroom. So I spent a lot of time with my host family though, more than most people in my program, I think, just because they had kids and they really like included me in the family. And they told me I looked like their host daughter. So they like really like brought me in, but I think I learned a little bit more in that regard and got to speak more French that way. But we, outside of the class, it was like French didn't really exist for us. Of course, when we were like in public, we had to order in French and stuff and use that to get around. But besides that, we were pretty off base there.
Got it. Okay. What were the types of learning that you experienced in and outside of the classroom? Did you travel with a group of other students? Did you travel with natives? Sarah, you want to start?
Sure. I mostly traveled with the other students in my program. The first semester, I tried to make it a point to travel every other weekend because I didn't want to be that kid who moves to Paris and then doesn't spend a single weekend in Paris. That just seemed pointless. But I did want to see the rest of France, at least while I could. So I, every other weekend, went somewhere else. And then when I was in Brussels is Belgium is a very small country, and there really are not that many fun places to go, not to diss the country. It's great for like a week and that's about it. So when I was in Brussels, I did leave the country a lot more. But then I was traveling by myself, actually.
Alex?
Trying to remember, with the host family, it wasn't really a lot of traveling per se. It was more so sometimes they would go to some event, and if me and the other student who was being hosted by this family, if there was a day where they knew we were going to be free because we didn't have classes, then they would invite us, and for the most part, almost every time we went with them. Um, I definitely made a point to see as much of at least um, the main part of the city as possible. That I did a lot of by myself, and sometimes with other students. But there were times where they did do traveling over the weekend, and that is one of my few regrets about the program, about doing this program, was not going with them. But then again, that's more so because I have this thing where if I'm not explicitly invited, if they don't be like, Alexander, do you want to go with us? And I don't say anything. But now I'm like, I should have weaseled my way into that. Like I could have seen Marseille, I could have seen Barcelona, because I was there when they were having those conversations of going to these places, and I'm like, I should have weaseled my way in. Could have done it, but since nobody explicitly invited me, I was like, I'm not going to say anything. So that's one of my very few regrets about doing the study abroad program.
Just thinking about our program too, Alexander, this is another reason, like you really have to do your research because we had a 6-week program. It was super intensive and you could not miss class. So like there was a weekend where Chloe and I were out at the same time. So I was trying to go to Geneva to see Chloe. We got in huge trouble for like even making that plan because we were going to miss one day. So if you like, it was good. It was a very rigorous program. We got a lot done in 6 weeks, but that's the kind of thing where like, if you want to be traveling, we traveled after. I would recommend building that time in elsewhere or picking a program that offers a little bit more leeway. Like I think Sarah, you were saying since yours was longer, I feel like we had this conversation, you were able to travel more.
Yeah, we had Fridays off. None of the IES programs make you take class on Fridays, which is super nice.
That's amazing. So like, that's not what our program was. Our program was intensive French in Avignon. And if you want to go do a day trip or a little weekend trip, that's cool, but you can't miss school. So yeah.
You also had to tell the administration where you were going,
Oh,
because
yeah.
then if something happened and they didn't know, that's a problem.
Yeah. So again, do your research.
Yeah, I completely understand that. Chloe?
My program was pretty different compared to Megan and Alexander's. We were given kind of free reign to travel when we could. The first 2 weeks we had pretty like intensive lectures and things and visits to places around Geneva. But the second half of that, we were given just time to work on our independent projects. So we could go places for interviews. We could really take the days to ourselves and just spend that time how we wanted. You still had to like report all your travel and stuff, but we went to Barcelona and Italy, and I took some like small trips with my host family, but they kind of gave you the time to do what you wanted and use your time as you saw fit. So that was pretty nice that you had more flexibility. And of course, Geneva's pretty central to places, so you could get really anywhere you wanted to quickly.
Got it. All right. In what ways have you grown from your study abroad experience? Chloe, if you want to take it away.
Yes. I was frightened to death to be with my family at first. my mom speaks French. She is French, so I grew up like speaking it, but I think I was also nervous to not be in France specifically, and just how I was curious how Geneva was going to work out. Great decision. Glad I did it. Loved it. But I think that just that type of program that I did gave me more confidence academic-wise. I could, go out wherever really and do an independent project on my own. I was contacting organizations in Switzerland I'd never heard of, didn't know. We were kind of just thrown to the wolves to, pursue what we wanted, but figure out how to make it happen. So I think I told myself after navigating, a foreign country that has, 4 pretty dominant languages, if I can figure out how to get around, produce a project, survive the program, then I could really do a lot of things. So I think it gave me a lot of confidence in a lot of areas. And it really helped me going into grad school. And it kind of steered me, that was the first thing that really steered me to looking at grad school. So kind of changed my interest in academic pursuits also.
Yeah, study abroad definitely makes a huge impact. Alexander?
I think as far as personal growth is concerned, at least throughout the program and in the year after, I know this is kind of weird to say, but I'm not sure if I necessarily grew as much as a person outside of I am now confident enough to travel to another country by myself, which is a big step. But I mean, when you consider sometimes people say they grew in all these different ways when it comes to study abroad, which happens a lot. Not exactly the same for me. I had already been used to, traveling from one place to another on my own, but, within the United States jurisdiction, because I'm from Puerto Rico. So I'd always been traveling between the two for 2 years by that point. Traveling somewhere outside, that was on my own. Traveling outside on my own for the first time, now that was new. So that's definitely something that, okay, I feel comfortable being able to do this now. I do think that, yes, it helps out in terms of, applying for graduate programs and whatnot. But when it comes to personal growth, I think it was mostly, more self-confidence in, being able to travel, but also, like I said before, being able to have a better grasp of the language. Those were 2 ways that I definitely know that I grew in the 6 weeks that I was in Avignon.
Yeah. Meaghan?
Yeah, I think I grew a lot. There is a certain confidence that comes when you are feeling yourself able to express yourself in a language you've been studying for a long time. But I think more than study abroad, it was my theory to practice grants that really drove a lot of my personal growth. I did one with Chloe actually, because that is really a situation more like what Chloe was describing with her project, where you are in charge. It's your task is to go to this place and to accomplish this goal, whether it's research or volunteering. And so the 2 that I did in France, or 3, I can't remember, but the things that I did in France through the Theory to Practice grant program are often the experiences I draw upon most as a teacher, just because I was like, when you're in control of an experience and when you're being held accountable in like a very personal way, it's really powerful. So I would highly recommend not only study abroad, but going for those grant experiences that OU has so many of. Cannot recommend enough.
Yeah, and I've been trying to think about this question because study abroad, I also studied abroad in high school. And oh my God, sorry. I also studied abroad in high school. And so I knew this was what I wanted to do. There weren't very many nerves. And I guess my program in France, I don't feel like I learned personally that much. But the program in Brussels definitely, I'm not sure if the word is learned, but just kind of gave me a different mindset and a different perspective on things, because I always considered myself to be fairly put together and knew a lot of things. And then I showed up in the European Parliament and had to study for like a month beforehand because I didn't know how anything worked. And when I got there, everyone else, this is like the government they grew up with their entire life. And so they don't understand why I didn't just know these things. So I learned a lot about that, and also a lot about learning quickly and being humble and just sort of shutting my mouth until I've learned how to converse with people like this. And I also think that gave me confidence as well. And when I came back, I had all these ideas of things that I wanted to research. And actually, even now, I've been rereading the papers I wrote in undergrad just because I'm trying to write a master's thesis right now, and I don't feel super confident about myself. And when I go back and read what I wrote at OU directly after I came home from that study abroad experience, I'm like, I was so smart. I had so many ideas. I wrote so well. I can do it again, right?
Thank you.